Amen. In case you didn't catch that, next week is the one day out of the year that we honor the dads. So bring your dad. We love dads. I love Mother's Day is amazing, and when we do Mother's Day, we have like all kinds of decor, flowers. We had the flower booth. We had chocolates. We try and make it smell nice in here, and everybody dresses up. And then for Father's Day, we have meat, and it makes everything good. All right. My name is Gabe. I'm one of the pastors on staff here, and I'm very excited to speak to you today. I feel like a message from God, and the devil tried to take me off of it last night. I woke up so anxious, so worried, and 5:30 in the morning, I jumped out of bed, and Gabby's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, I got to get to church. And she's like, "Gabe," and I was like half awake, and she's like, "Wake up." And I was like, "What?" And she goes, "Are you okay?" And then it finally snapped into it, and I was awake. But I had a dream last night, and in my dream, it was 8:35, and I woke up, but I woke up in Nebraska, and I knew that I had to speak, and Pastor Jerry, I woke up because Pastor Jerry was calling me, and I picked up the phone, and he's like, "Hey, Gabe, you're not here yet." And I said, "I'm going to be a little bit late." And he's like, "Why?" I said, "Because I'm in Nebraska." So I ran out of the house in Nebraska, and I'm from Nebraska, just so you know. I'm running down the street, and I'm just drenched in sweat. And so in my dream, I got my cardio in for the day, literally woke up sweaty this morning thinking that I was in Nebraska, but I'm not. I'm here, and that's good because the message that we have from God today for us is really good. Look at somebody and say, it's going to be real good. I remember when I was 5 years old, I was in Nebraska, and growing up, we had this cabin on a lake, which was right next to a river, and whenever it would storm, the river would rise because the rain would take place in Colorado, would come down, and if there were a lot of storms, then the water would rise up a lot, and we would go over to the river, and all the kids that were older than me, they would go on top of this railroad bridge, and it was a working railroad bridge, so there were rail trains that came across, and they would get up on the bridge and they would jump off and do flips and stuff into the river, and it was really fun, really amazing. So all of us went over to the river. There was this storm looming in the distance, and they were jumping off of the bridge. I was maybe 5 years old. I had my life jacket on with like the little strap that goes between your legs and like super uncomfortable and attaches like here, and you talk like this when you're wearing it, and I went over there and I watched the kids time after time jump off, and they would go off of the bridge, jump into the water, run to the shore, go up again, do it over and over and over again. And as the storm in the distance getting stronger, the water's getting more tumultuous. And I thought, well, I'm going to try it. I just want to try it one time. And all the parents were in the water, waded out into the water, and I got up on the edge, and they were getting ready to come grab me as soon as I popped up out of the water. So I'm 5, and I'm sitting on the railroad bridge like this, and I was like, okay, 1, 2, 1, 2. Finally, I jumped in, but we didn't account for the difference between me as a 5-year-old and them as 12 or older, the adults that were doing it. And so what happened was a little bit different than with everybody else. I went underwater, and actually the current sucked me down, and I was just freaking out in the water. I was like, oh my gosh, thinking as a 5-year-old, this is my last day. And what happened is it sucked me down underwater, and I came out about 20 yards past where all of the adults were. So they're looking for me, and I pop up out of the water 20 yards down, going down the river in whitewash rapids while everybody's looking at me. And so I was scared, and I'm trying to pump my 5-year-old arms as best I can to get to the edge, and I see all of the adults running down the side, and there was somebody hopped into a pickup truck and started driving down the road that was next to it. And eventually what happened is I saw everybody else kind of panicking, everybody else running after me, and I thought, if all these people are coming after me to make sure that I'm okay, that maybe I'll be okay. And so I sat in my life jacket as a 5-year-old, and I put an arm back, put another arm back, and just sat back and relaxed and found peace in the middle of the storm. The person that actually grabbed me out, and this is funny, I'm from a really small town, but it was the mayor of my town. So thank you, Ken, if you're watching, for pulling me out of the water and saving my life. Love you, Mom and Dad. This was not your fault. Okay. But I just had this feeling today that all of us are probably in some capacity in a storm. Now, the reality of the storms of life is they don't end like the storms like we have in San Diego today. This is a storm. When it gets cloudy, it's a storm, right? But the storms of life, right, they don't just go away like a storm does blowing away in an hour or two. And some of us maybe woke up anxious this morning, not just from a bad dream that we had, but we woke up anxious this morning from some circumstance that is going on in life. Maybe it's not a 1-year circumstance or a 1-week circumstance. Maybe it's a decade. Maybe it's been a lifetime. Maybe it's family members that are going through something difficult. Maybe it's a marriage. Maybe it's the person sitting next to you. Don't raise your hand. But maybe it's your kids. Maybe it's your school. I don't know what it is. But I have this feeling that all of us are going through a storm today. We've been talking about this new series on peace, and I believe that God wants to give us peace today. There's a story in the Bible, Mark chapter 4, verses 35 to chapter 5 and verse 1, and it says this: on that day, when evening had come, on that day, I'd like to just stop there. This is the day that we understand what it looks like to have peace in Jesus. And I just want to declare it into the atmosphere that everyone who came into the room with anxiety or worry or stress or a situation or a storm that has felt like it's just been going on for so long, today, on this day, peace will come in the name of Jesus. When evening had come, he said to them, let's go across to the other side. And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in a boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. Verse 37, and a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat so that the boat was already filling. Verse 38, but he was in the stern asleep on a cushion. Pastor Jerry shared this part of this passage shortly last week, that Jesus was asleep on a cushion. And this is a story about the disciples who were professional fishermen, and Jesus, a carpenter, gets into the boat in the storm, and he's asleep on a cushion. It says, and they woke him and said to him, teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Verse 39, and he woke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm, and he said to them, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? Verse 1 of chapter 5 ends by saying, they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. Pastor Jerry started us in a series last week that's titled Fresh Start Summer. Believe that this is a fresh start. Today's a new start. Today's a day of peace, that we find peace. And today I want to talk to you about the subject, you can have peace even when the storm won't stop. God, we thank you. We thank you, God, today that you are the Prince of Peace, and we welcome you into the room. You have all jurisdiction over peace. You have all authority over peace. And God, there are some of us in this room, maybe all of us in this room, that came into this room today carrying weights and burdens and anxieties and stresses and things that don't seem to change. But God, you say to us today, as the ruler over peace, that today we can have peace and understand what it means to have peace even in the middle of a storm. God, we believe for it, and so we receive it by saying and believing for it by saying amen. Amen. First thing that we get from the story, and we got to understand to unlock the story, how do we find peace even in the middle of the storm? When some of us came into the room today, came into life for a long time, carrying anxieties and worries and stresses, what do we find from this story to find peace even in the middle of the storm? The first thing that I think is important for us to grab out of this passage is that God has a destination for you. God has a destination for you. This is a faith statement. Now, in Mark chapter 4, in verse 35, Jesus himself says to the disciples, let's go across to the other side. A bunch of stuff happens between verse 35 and verse 1 of the next chapter, which says, they came to the other side of the sea. But let me just say this, that this was a faith statement for them to hold on to in the middle of the journey, and they didn't do a great job of it. Let's go across to the other side. God has a destination. The destination is to the other side. And wherever you're at right now, if you are in the middle of the storm, that is not your final destination. Your final destination is not in the middle of the storm. Your final destination is on the other side. So they came, every one of them. Not most of them. Not the ones who were doing everything right, but every one of them that got into the boat with Jesus, they started on one side, and every one of them that got into the boat got to the other side. Have you ever been stuck in a storm? I remember another natural storm story. First time that Gabby and I drove to Nebraska for Christmas. And we were on our way there, and there was a snowstorm. It wasn't crazy, but we got into Lincoln, Nebraska, got to my sister's house, and we went inside, and we were planning on staying there for one night. And we were all going to go to my parents' house for a longer period of time, but we were just going there for one night. And so we didn't have a lot of food. We had a couple cans of soup. We had a whole bunch of cookies and a whole bunch of Christmas candy, and that's all we had. So the first night, we go to sleep, and we wake up the next day, and it had been a blizzard. And it was like the whole, cosmos exploded in Nebraska, and you couldn't open the door. We couldn't get outside. We're like, man, we don't have any food. We had maybe some Hot Pockets, which are not real food, right? Found them in the freezer. It's like these things have been here for 4 decades. They're exactly the same. It's like a Twinkie, only hot. But the storm hit, and we ended up getting snowed in for 3 days, couldn't get to the grocery store, couldn't get anywhere. The pipes froze at one point, and we're like, man, I don't think we have any water. We're going outside picking up snow to try and melt it, to drink it. It was crazy land, right, in Nebraska. But eventually, the storm subsided. And after being delayed 3 days, missing church here on a Sunday, we got in the car, and for the first 10 miles, it took us about 3 hours to go the first 10 miles. Cars were still sliding off the ditch, sliding off the road into the ditch. But finally, we broke through Colorado, and we saw in the distance the waters of San Diego, and we got here. What's the point of that story? What's the point of this story with the disciples? Jesus says to them in verse 35, we're going to the other side. In verse 1 of chapter 5, he says they came to the other side of the sea. Your destination, what's the point of this? Your destination, my destination, our destination. If you're in the middle of the storm, the destination is never the storm. God's destination for our life is never the storm. God has a destination for you and for me, and it never ends with us stuck in the storm. Whatever happens in the middle is part of God's plan to maybe teach us and train us, but we'll never stop in the middle. God always has a plan on the other side. His plan is never to get us stuck in a storm. And if you've been in a storm for a really long time, that is not where the landing place and the ending place is. But the second point is the reality of life. What is the reality of life? Storms will come. Right? Storms will come. Storms are not just always natural. They're emotional. They're financial. Some of us here might be in a physical storm. Some of us might have a bad health diagnosis. Some of us might be in financial storms, school storm. Wondering, I took all my finals last week. Did I pass them? A health storm. A storm with your kids. A storm in your marriage. Storms will come. In this passage in verse 37, it doesn't just say a storm, it says a great windstorm arose. To the point where a bunch of professional fishermen wake up a carpenter to see if he'll help. It was an intense storm. And you might be thinking, I'm in an intense storm. The hardest question that I think I've had to answer in my life as a dad, and my son was in here first service, is when my son asked me one day, and I wasn't sure how to answer it. He said, "Dad, how come God doesn't answer my prayers?" Whew. You know, sometimes the prayers are for a dog. Sometimes the prayers are for a unicorn. And I can tell you why God doesn't answer those. But sometimes the prayers of my kids are when they go to sleep at night, they say, I just want to have peace. I don't want to get scared in the middle of the night. God, will you help me? And they wake up in the middle of the night sometimes and they're crying. Some of us are waking up in the middle of the night and we're crying, and it's not because of boogeyman under the bed. It's because of the difficulties of life. When storms come, we fight fear. So did the disciples. When the storm comes, we wonder, is there any way out? My greatest fear that I remember having in the history of my adulthood was when we found out that Gabby was pregnant with my son, Isaac, and I was in Paris leading a missions trip. And she calls and says, I'm in the hospital, and the doctor says they don't know if I'm going to make it, and they don't know if the baby's going to make it. So what did I do? I got into a tube on an airplane in Paris, and I hop in, and I have no connection to the outside world. So for 6 hours, maybe 8 hours, I'm flying from Paris to Miami and thinking, God, are you real? I mean, I knew he was real, right? Somewhere in me, I'm paid to be a Christian, right? I'm a pastor. So I got to believe this stuff. And at that moment, I'm having a hard time believing this. One of the reasons I'm having a hard time believing it is because a couple months earlier, we were leading a summer intern group, and we went to Las Vegas, and we listened to this pastor preach. We went to Denver, Phoenix, came back, and in Las Vegas, somebody was speaking, and I remember the moment, and the pastor's talking about Genesis, and he says, your call is to be fruitful and to multiply. And that's the moment, 2 years maybe into our marriage, I thought, this is time for us to have kids. And I texted Gabby and said, I know God's speaking to us. It's time to have kids. And so I get onto this plane in Paris after finding out that we're pregnant, wondering, is she going to make it? Is the baby going to make it? I get on a tube and I'm like, God, where are you? That's the kind of storm that we're talking about today, not just a natural storm. The disciples had the same question at the end of verse 38. They said, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? I was on that plane asking, God, do you even care? Do you? And God's okay with that question. And if you've been asking that question, he's okay with that question. He can handle it. And that was me. God, don't you care? Don't you care about this baby? Don't you care about my wife? Don't you care about me? And the struggle I was having on the plane was not just a natural storm ending. It was not just that the answer came. The struggle that I was having on the plane was my faith. When storms come, the purpose of the storm in life is not to kill you. The purpose of the storm in the disciples' life was not to kill them. The storm wasn't going to kill them, but it was killing their faith. Jesus didn't take them out onto the water to show them how to calm a storm. If he took them on the water to show them how to calm a storm, then he would have woke himself up. They wouldn't have woken him up. He knew what he was doing. And our example in the story, because I want it to be the disciples, because I see myself in the disciples, right? That they're scared, they're worried, they're anxious. They're going, God, I'm dying here. It's your fault. Our example in the story is not meant to be the disciples, though. Our example in the story is meant to be Jesus, who's chilling on a pillow in the back of the boat in perfect peace in the middle of the storm. Because the storm won't get you. When Jesus says, I'm taking you from here to there, the storm won't get you. What's the purpose of the storm then? The storm from the devil, from the enemy in your life, not from God, but from the enemy. The storm in your life, what it wants to do is it wants to stop your faith. Because if the storm can kill our faith, then it can steal our peace. It's one of the most amazing passages of Scripture when it comes to peace because it's real life. The storm, the enemy of our existence, the devil himself wants to stop our faith. Because the reality, one of the things that I have to teach my kids and I have to teach myself, and the older I get, the more I realize, is that when I want the storm to stop, it doesn't always stop. And when I say, God, can you stop this? It doesn't always stop. God's way bigger than every situation, every circumstance, everything we're going through, every sickness. But for some reason, and I don't know why, sometimes we ask, sometimes we declare, sometimes we pray, and sometimes it doesn't change. We have a fight. We've been fighting for one of our family members for 20 years. 20 years. Some of you have been fighting for decades for something. It's a family member that's been going through lots of hard times. It's the kind of situation where you get the phone call in the middle of the night at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you're looking at the phone and you're thinking, is this the end? Is it over? Did he die on the streets or in the rehab? And that's what hits your heart, right? I don't know what your storm is or what your situation is, but that's one of ours, and it's been going on for a really long time. Jesus, in this story, he doesn't stop the storm to save them. That's something that maybe we don't catch when we read this all the time, that he doesn't stop the storm to save them because he already knows that the storm's not going to win. He stops the storm to teach them. Otherwise, we wouldn't have verses like James chapter 1 that say, consider it joy when you face trials of all kinds, so that in the end, when you go through this trial, you will have perfect peace, not lacking anything. You'll be perfect. You'll be complete, not lacking a thing. Why do we need that verse if God's like a genie and everything we ask, he just does it? That's not who he is. He wants us to realize that I'm not just the God that brings the end to the storm. I'm the God that's the peace in the middle of the storm. Because sometimes we think of life and it's like, man, I'm looking to the light at the end of the tunnel. And if I could just get to the light, if I could just get to the end of the struggle, then everything will be okay. If I just had the money, if I just had the house, if I just got married, if I just had kids, if I just had, I'd be happy. But that's not God. God is not just the light at the end of the tunnel. God's the light in the middle of the tunnel. So what's the key? We got to just not allow the storm to get bigger than our faith. And if the key to this story was that Jesus, they just wanted him to believe enough that he'd get up and he'd calm the storm, and if he just did that, then everything's going to be okay. That puts God in the genie in the bottle, and we rub it and we ask and he does what we want, and we're God and not him. But we got to hold on to verses like Romans 8:28 that says God will work all things together for good. Even if I'm in the middle of it, I'm going to say it. I'm going to declare it. God's bigger. God's larger. God's more amazing. And why he's mad at the disciples in the story is because of their lack of faith. Get it? The storm calms and it says they're fearful. The storm's over and they're still scared. They didn't end in perfect peace because the storm ended. And Jesus says, I want to teach you. Come on. Jesus says to us, Carmel Church, I want to teach you. When you're in the middle of the storm, the anxiety, the worry, the stress, the fear, all of it. Jesus says to us today, point 4, there can be peace in the storm. There can be peace in your storm, not just after it ends, but right in the middle of it. Sitting in the middle of the storm was Jesus, the embodiment of peace, sleeping on a pillow. So what does he teach them? I think that's why he stopped the storm, was to teach them. He says 3 words, peace, be still. These 3 words translate into 2 words in the original language in the Greek. The first one is peace. First service, I got the transliteration wrong. This is right. Peace, psyopau. And I don't promise, I'm not Greek, I'm Gabe, right? So I don't get them all right all the time. The meaning is the same. Peace, what it means when Jesus gets up and he says, peace in the storm. It refers to a state of tranquility, serenity, harmony, and wholeness. He didn't get up and say, storm, stop. He got up and he said, peace. We want him to get up and say, storm, stop. But he wants us to learn that we can have peace even before the storm ends. Peace, this word it's a soul language word. It's soul language. That's why Jesus says words like in Matthew 11:28, the verse says, come to me all who are weary and heavy laden, and you will find rest for your souls. What would you rather have? The answer to your question, the problem to be solved, or peace? What would we rather have? The world's peace? Maybe the finances? Maybe the house? Maybe the marriage? Maybe the kids? Maybe the white picket fence? Is that what we want? Or would we rather have peace? Jesus says, come to me all who are weary, and I will give you rest. I'll give you peace in your souls. It's deeper. This is the same word, that psyopau word in Matthew chapter 26, where Jesus is going before the high priest, and it says Jesus kept his peace. As the high priest is about to tell him, you're going to be condemned to the most painful death that has ever been devised by humanity, Jesus kept his serenity, his tranquility, his harmony, his peace. It didn't change the circumstances, but on the inside, he was strong and solidified and secure in peace. Second thing that Jesus says, he says peace, that first word, and then he says be still. Transliteration of that is pephamoso. This doesn't mean storm stop. Everything they're asking for, let it be done. What it means is to muzzle, to silence, to make silent, a command to stop talking. The storm is going crazy. The disciples, professional fishermen, think they're going to die, and Jesus gets up and he says, shut up, storm. After this, the next few words is when it says that the storm calms and the storm stops. But before it, Jesus says, shut up, storm. Be quiet. What do we learn from this? Some of our storms, we need to say to it, be quiet. Anxiety, be quiet. Oh, that voice that wakes me up in the middle of the night that says, oh, they're going to die, be quiet. Stop talking to me. No, I don't receive that voice. That voice is not the voice of God. The voice of God would say, be quiet and you can have peace and you just wait and see, because I said you're here, but you're going there. And so in the middle, whatever that voice is that comes in, I say, be quiet. I don't receive anxiety. I don't receive worry. I don't receive the stress. I don't receive the fear. No. Our example in the story is not the disciples. It's Jesus asleep on a pillow. When I was a little kid, my dad is an artist, was a photographer, and in our basement in Nebraska, anybody know what a basement is here, right? It's a whole floor of a house that's underground. But in this basement, we had this bookshelf, and on the bookshelf, there were all these artists that my dad had these books of, and it was Leonardo, and it was Leonardo da Vinci, and it was Raphael and Michelangelo and all the Ninja Turtles, right? But one of them was Rembrandt. And I remember opening up this book, and I looked in this book, and there was a painting in this book by Rembrandt, and it was the picture of Jesus in the boat on the water. And it stood out to me, and I think there it is. It stood out to me, and it's just like in my mind from like 8 to 10 years old, I just can see this picture every time I think of the story. And I always thought I'm going to go see it someday. What's interesting about this painting, just side note, in 1990, it was stolen from an art gallery, and they've never found it. It's thought to be one of the most famous paintings ever and the greatest art heist in the history of art heists, I guess. Maybe bigger than Ocean's 11 or 12, I don't know. But Ocean's 11, that was funny. But you learn a couple things from this. One of them is right in the middle, and you can zoom in. Right in the middle is a guy that's holding on to a rope. And I think we have a picture that zooms in a little bit. But that's actually right there on the left. That is Rembrandt himself, painted himself in the picture. Only person in the boat that's looking at the audience is him. And it's him putting himself in the boat saying, this could be any of us in the middle of a storm. What you see is you see Jesus, and he's there, and he's the example. Everybody else is scared. The guy on the bottom's thrown up over the side. Everybody's fearful, and Jesus is chilling on a pillow. He's our example. You can zoom back out, but the most amazing thing to me that I think God would speak to us out of this passage and out of even this picture today is this. You look on the left and the storms are great. You look back to the back right and the storms are going crazy. You look at Jesus, the closer you get to Jesus, the more the storm subsides and you see peace. What Jesus would say to us today, what God would say to us today, in the middle of the storm, you can have peace, even when the storm won't stop. You can have peace even when the storm won't stop. You can have peace even when the storm won't stop. Last week, Pastor Jerry spoke on peace, and his landing point for the message is going to be the same landing point for the message today. There are 3 things that will keep us close to Jesus. There are 3 things that will keep us close to him. There are three things that will help strengthen our faith. Because if the devil in the storm can kill our faith, it can steal our peace. 3 things that keep us in faith. Gabby and I, for our 10-year anniversary, we decided we were going to go on a cruise. And I'd never been on a cruise before. I grew up around water on boats. I was on a water ski team in college. Been around water my whole life. But we got onto the boat, and I remember there was a storm that was coming in, and we're in Long Beach, and there's water coming in the side of the boat, and there's lightning in the distance. They kept saying, once we get on the boat and we get out, we'll go around the storm and everything will be good. But we're in the middle of it, and all I could think of, first cruise I ever got on, I'm like, I am on the Titanic right now. I'm Jack, and we're going down. So they tell us, here's the first thing that you have to do before we can leave. Everybody has to go to the muster station. M-U-S-T-A-R, I think. Not mustard station. You know, the rest of the cruise you eat, you know. But this is the muster station. And what you do is you go to the lifeboats. And they tell you, this is what happens if you get in the middle of a storm. This is how you're going to be okay. So we're standing by the lifeboat. And they say, this is your life preserver. Say, everybody grab one. Everybody put it on. Want you to know what it feels like. If you get in the middle of the storm, here's what you do. They said on your life preserver, there's a couple things. One is there's a light. But just so you know, the light's not working now. You have to wait. Once you get in the water, once you get in the storm, that's when the light really turns on. He said there's another thing. There's a whistle. So if you get out in the water, you need to cry out for help. Blow the whistle. Somebody just woke up, right? So there's a third thing. It's actually in the boat. But there's a rope with a buoy on it. And if you get caught out in the water, somebody on the boat is going to throw it to you and help you. Like taking notes. I think in that today, that's the message. It's the message that Pastor Jerry gave last week. It's the message we have today. How do we get close to Jesus? How do we stay in faith? How do we keep faith that will give us peace even in the middle of a storm? It's like the light. What's the light? What's the light? The light is the Word of God. The Bible says in Psalm 119, 105, by your words I can see where I'm going. They throw a beam of light on my dark path. Some of us might be in a dark path today. Man, it's been hard. I'm not trying to minimize it or put humor on it. It's real. God says to us, the way that we illuminate the path and get the faith to keep the peace in the middle of the storm is the Word of God. Romans chapter 10, verse 17 says, faith comes by hearing and hearing the Word of God. That's how we get faith and keep faith to give us peace in the middle of the storm. Second thing they told us is the whistle, right? You can cry out at any time for help. If you get into the water, you get thrown out of the boat, that's what you do. You blow the whistle. That's like prayer. Philippians 4, 6-7 says, don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him for all He has done. Then, when we pray, then we get. When we pray, then we get. When we blow the whistle of prayer, then we experience God's peace, which exceeds anything that we can understand. I like to call it stupid peace, peace that goes bigger than what the circumstances say that I should be feeling. Third thing, Pastor Jerry said it last week, is the church. Sometimes the anxiety, the worry, the stress in the storm is bigger than us, and we're just tossed out. That's why we need the church. That's why we need each other. That's why I needed the mayor of my town, Ken, to come stretch out a hand and pull me out of the water. Because I couldn't do it on my own. And we can't. And that's why we need the church. I want to pray for us as we end today. If you could just close your eyes and put your hand on your heart. Some of us here, some of us have been fighting, man, in a storm, waging warfare. Some of us maybe have given up faith, or the faith has just been killed and stolen our peace. Today, God would say to us, come on, take up what gets you peace. Take up what gets you faith. Make a fresh commitment to get into the Bible, to pray. And if you need it, just ask some people around you to help. God, you're so good. God, I pray a fresh wind of grace into the room. Come on, grace to pursue you, grace to get into the Word. Come on, grace to pray. God, would you remind us, even today, as we get in our cars and we go into the world and maybe the storm is still there, would you help us to cry out to you and say, God, would you help? God, we thank you that you want to give us today peace, not just when the storm ends, but right in the middle of the storm. And by faith, we say yes to it. In Jesus' name, amen.